So imagine for a second that you are reading this incredibly glowing five-star review of a brand new restaurant.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And the critic just goes on and on. Like they're talking about the brilliant flavors, the immaculate kitchen, just flawless service.
Oh, yeah. You're ready to book a table immediately.
Exactly. You are completely sold. But then, right at the very bottom of the article, in this tiny, barely readable print, you see this little disclaimer.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. It says, the critic's salary is paid directly by the head chef of this restaurant.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that changes things.
Right. Suddenly that five-star review feels, well, a little less reliable. I mean, you would immediately start questioning literally everything you just read.
You absolutely would. And, the human brain is actually hardwired to look for that exact kind of conflict of interest.
Really, like inherently.
Oh, yeah. As soon as we see a direct financial relationship between the person doing the evaluating and the person being evaluated, our trust just naturally evaporates.
Just a fundamental problem of competing incentives.
Right. Exactly. It's a huge red flag.
And that tension, that exact red flag, is exactly what we are unpacking for you today. Welcome to your custom deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Because today we're looking at this massive question. How do you keep an independent data auditor truly independent when the company they are auditing is the one, actually signing their paychecks?
It's the ultimate catch-22.
It really is. So we have this stack of really insightful notes today regarding compliance under the DPDPA, that's the Digital Personal Data Protection Act.
Right.
And specifically, we are diving into the complex mechanics of making sure these mandatory data audits aren't just like expensive rubber stamps. They need to be actual objective evaluations of a company's data practices.
Which remains, frankly, the defining paradox of the auditing world.
How so?
Well, you need an outsider's objective perspective to ensure a company is handling consumer data safely, especially under the strict DPDPA framework.
Right, someone from the outside looking in.
Exactly. But that outsider has to be compensated, and the entity cutting the check is usually the management team of the exact company being audited.
Right. The people who built the system.
Yes. So the psychological pressure there, even if it is entirely unspoken, it's immense.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source material you provided, it tackles this tension head on.
It really does.
The notes point out a pretty critical flaw in the standard corporate setup. Because the management team, like the day-to-day executives, the people who actually design the very data systems being audited.
They're the ones who champion those systems.
Right. If they're the ones who appoint the auditor and authorize their payment, well, the auditor is going to feel an inherent sense of obligation to them. You don't want to bite the hand that feeds you, right?
Especially if you want them to hire you again next year.
Exactly. So what's the fix?
What's fascinating here is that the proposed structural solution attempts to bypass that psychological trap entirely.
Okay. How do they do that?
The notes suggest a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. You basically take the power of appointment completely away from the management team and you give it directly to the shareholders.
Oh, wow. Okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
For it.
Because thinking about this from your perspective as a listener, that might actually sound counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, shareholders are kind of notorious for prioritizing quarterly profits, right? Stock performance. Like if I own stock at a company, I just want the stock price to go up.
Right, you want a return on your investment.
Yeah. So a hyper-rigorous shareholder-appointed auditor, they might uncover this massive systemic data flaw. And that could cost millions of dollars to overhaul.
Which hits the bottom line.
Exactly. It could severely impact quarterly earnings. So wouldn't shareholders naturally prefer a lenient auditor? Just to keep the machinery quiet and the stock price high.
That is a very common assumption. But it completely misreads the scale of the threat under modern data privacy laws. Yeah. We really have to look at the different time horizons that these two groups operate on. Management teams, they often work on much shorter timelines.
Right, like their own contracts.
Exactly. A CEO or a CTO might be eyeing a, say, 3-year tenure. They're looking to secure their performance bonuses and then, move on to another company.
Makes sense.
So if they use a cheap, flawed data architecture just to boost short-term margins, they might be long gone by the time it inevitably collapses.
They escaped the blast radius.
Precisely. They're out the door. Shareholders, however, they represent the long-term capital. They own the company.
Right.
So if a catastrophic data breach occurs down the road, or if the company is slapped with these crippling, business-ending non-compliance penalties under the DPDPA.
Which are huge, from what I understand.
Massive. It is the shareholders who absorb that blow. The stock doesn't just dip, the entire valuation of the company plummets.
Oh, I see.
So for the shareholders, a rigorous auditor isn't a nuisance that slows down operations. It is a critical insurance policy against catastrophic long-term risk.
Okay, that makes total sense. So by requiring shareholder approval for the appointment, you just severed that direct line of obligation to the people actually building the systems.
Exactly. The management might still physically process the invoice, but the auditor knows their actual mandate lies with the ultimate owners of the company.
It creates a really necessary buffer.
It solves the immediate problem of, who holds the leash.
Right. But time is a funny thing. And as our source material makes very clear, fixing that initial appointment is really only half the battle.
Yeah, that's just day one.
Because even if you start out with the most fiercely independent shareholder-appointed auditor on the planet, dynamics change when you stick around too long.
They always do. People get comfortable.
Exactly. Which brings us to a really specific best practice highlighted in your notes. This is introduced by Naavi, who is a very prominent voice and has a whole framework in the data protection space.
Right. The concept of a strict term limit. The Naavi framework really addresses that gradual, almost imperceptible erosion of independence over time.
And Naavi's rule is totally unambiguous. No data auditor should continue to audit the same company for more than 3 consecutive years.
A hard stop at year 3.
A hard stop. And honestly, when I was reading through these notes, I immediately thought of having a house guest.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right? If you've ever had a friend stay at your place for an extended period of time, you see this exact psychological shift happen.
The transition from hyper-awareness to basically total blindness.
Yes. On day 1, your house guest notices literally everything. They notice the squeaky floorboard in the hallway. They notice that the hot water takes exactly 40 seconds to kick in.
They see the massive stack of junk mail you've been ignoring on the kitchen counter.
Exactly. They see your house with totally fresh, objective eyes. But by week 3...
You're stepping right over that junk mail.
They're stepping over the junk mail, just like you do. They instinctively avoid the squeaky floorboard without even thinking about it. They become blind to the environment because they have slowly just become a part of it.
Yeah, and that is the exact mechanism of cognitive complacency. And in the high-stakes world of data auditing, that complacency is incredibly dangerous.
Because the stakes are so much higher than junk mail.
Much higher. An auditor in their first year is rigorous. They are mapping out every API endpoint. They are questioning every data pipeline, aggressively testing the boundaries of the whole compliance framework.
Right, doing their job.
But fast forward to year 4 or year 5, they know the IT team by their first names. They understand all the quirky internal company jargon.
They're going out to lunch together.
Exactly. And they start making assumptions. So if they spot a potential vulnerability in a server, instead of formally flagging it as a compliance risk, they might just think, oh, I know the engineers in server maintenance, they're good people. They'll patch that eventually.
Wow, so the objectivity just fades into familiarity.
Exactly.
But again, let's push back on this timeline a bit. Because 3 years, that feels like the blink of an eye in corporate time.
Shit is fast.
Think about the sheer amount of friction it takes to onboard a completely new auditor. You have to grant them deep administrative access, spend weeks teaching them your entirely unique proprietary data architecture.
Oh, it's a huge undertaking.
And introduce them to dozens of key stakeholders across different departments. That is a massive drain on resources. It doesn't constantly switching auditors every 36 months just create a massive administrative headache.
It does.
Doesn't it destroy any operational efficiency you've managed to build up?
Well, the friction you are describing is very real, and it is a major pain point for corporate compliance officers. Onboarding is expensive, and it's time-consuming.
Yeah, nobody likes doing it.
No. However, the source material provides the foundational logic for why this specific 3-year norm is necessary, despite those obvious administrative headaches.
Okay, what's the logic?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text explicitly points out that this 3-year limit is entirely consistent with the norms that have already been adopted by statutory financial auditors.
Oh, so they aren't just pulling this 3-year timeline out of thin air.
Not at all.
They are basically borrowing a mechanism from the financial world.
Exactly. The financial sector learned this lesson the incredibly hard way over many, many decades.
Right, with all those massive scandals.
Exactly. Historically, Long-term, overly cozy relationships between corporations and their financial auditors led to catastrophic blind spots.
Enron comes to mind.
Yep. When an auditor spends a decade with a client, they stop asking the hard questions. And that eventually resulted in massive, economy-shaking corporate collapses. So to combat that, the financial industry instituted strict mandatory rotation rules.
Okay, so the data auditing world is just looking at those proven anti-complacency frameworks of traditional finance and applying them directly to data compliance.
Yes. You sacrifice a little bit of onboarding convenience to ensure you don't end up with an auditor who is functionally asleep at the wheel.
The slight loss in administrative efficiency is simply the premium you pay for guaranteed structural objectivity.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because it is very easy to put a 3-year rule on a piece of paper. Right?
Yeah, talk is cheap.
It's one thing to say, hey, everyone, it would be a really great idea if you all switched auditors every 3 years to avoid complacency.
Right.
It is entirely another thing to actually make them do it. I mean, a theoretical best practice doesn't mean anything if there are no real consequences for ignoring it.
And this is where the rubber meets the road. The source notes detail a very specific two-pronged approach to how this 3-year limit is intended to be implemented.
Okay.
And, more importantly, how it's enforced in the real world. We are really looking at a transition from theory to operational reality here.
Okay, let's break those two prongs down because they seem to represent very different strategies for changing corporate behavior.
They do?
The first prong mentioned in the text revolves around the impaneled auditors of IDI, which functions as a self-regulatory body in this space, right?
Yeah.
The notes state that this 3-year limit will currently be suggested for these auditors as a core part of their self-regulation. So they're framing it as an issue of ethical conduct.
Yes.
And furthermore, the plan is to eventually officially embed this into the code of conduct for ADI impaneled auditors.
Right. So this first approach, it really attempts to build a culture of compliance from the inside out.
Like an internal compass.
Exactly. By framing the 3-year limit as a matter of ethical conduct and, weaving it into the professional code of conduct, ADI is trying to set a behavioral standard.
Oh, okay.
They are defining what it actually means to be a reputable, trustworthy professional in the data auditing space. It relies heavily on the auditor's desire to maintain their professional integrity.
And they're standing among their peers, I imagine.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's an honor system. It's a professional pledge. And to be perfectly blunt, it sounds kind of like putting a jar of cookies in the corporate break room with a little sign that says, please only take one. It's the ethical thing to do.
I mean, that's fair.
Which is a lovely thought. And you hope everyone is a good person who follows the professional code. But human nature, combined with financial gravity, usually wins out.
It often does.
If a company really likes their auditor, and the auditor really likes the steady, lucrative paycheck, and year 4 rolls around, why wouldn't they just collectively decide to look the other way?
Right.
An ethical code is fantastic for setting a baseline, but where are the teeth?
Well, the teeth are located in the second prong of the strategy detailed in your sources, and this is where the FDPPI comes into play.
Okay, what is that?
The FDPPI, the Foundation of Data Protection Professionals in India, they have a broader mechanism for regulating the certification partners who actually conduct these audits.
Oh, I see. So it's an overarching certification authority. It's totally separate from the self-regulatory ethical guidelines.
Yes. And unlike the ethical suggestions within a code of conduct, the FDPPI's approach is designed as a hard structural rule.
No wiggle room.
None. The source explicitly states that the FDPPI would include this 3-year limit as a mandatory requirement for their certified partners.
Okay. And if an auditing firm decides they, really want to keep that lucrative year 4 contract and simply ignores that requirement.
The text is unambiguous on the consequence. Auditors who do not adhere to this norm may lose their accreditation status.
Wow. Okay, but is losing accreditation actually a fatal blow, though?
What do you mean?
Well, in a lot of consulting industries, if a firm loses a specific certification, they just rebrand.
Right, they pivot.
Yeah, they take the plaque off the wall, they call themselves a data security consultant instead of a certified auditor, and they just keep cashing checks from the exact same clients.
It happens all the time.
So why is this specific stick so terrifying to an auditing firm?
Because of the legal mechanisms of the DPDPA itself. When a company is mandated by the government to undergo a data audit, they cannot just hire a random consultant with a nice website.
It's baked into the law.
Exactly. They are legally required to use an accredited certified auditing partner. The stamp of approval is literally the entire product the auditor is selling.
Oh, I get it now.
Yeah, so if an auditing firm loses its FDPPI accreditation, they lose their license to operate in the mandatory compliance market entirely.
It is professional exile. You're
Yeah,
just completely locked out of the ecosystem.
it forces compliance through survival.
That is intense.
It really is. And this dual approach is actually quite sophisticated from a systemic design perspective.
How so?
Well, you have the ADI working on the cultural front, normalizing the 3-year limit as an ethical baseline, making it something that good professionals just naturally do because it's the industry standard.
Right, a carrot.
Exactly. But standing right behind that cultural norm, you have the FDPPI wielding a very real, very severe structural consequence for those who try to game the system.
The stick. The internal ethics are backed up by an external guillotine.
That's a dramatic way to put it, but yes.
Well, synthesizing everything we've pulled from your sources today, it becomes incredibly clear that ensuring an independent data auditor actually remains independent is not something that just happens by accident.
Not at all.
It requires a really thoughtful, multi-layered architectural safety net to actively fight against human nature and the very real pressures of corporate finance.
You start by severing the initial bias. Placing the power of appointment in the hands of the shareholders rather than the management team ensures the auditor answers to the people holding the long-term risk, not the people building the short-term systems.
Right. And then you implement Naavi's rule, pulling for the hard-won lessons of the financial sector, capping the relationship at 3 years to prevent that houseguest cognitive complacency from ever taking root.
Finally, you enforce that time limit from both the inside and the outside.
The 2 prongs.
Exactly. You build it into the ethical fabric of the profession through self-regulatory bodies like AADI, and you back it up with the ultimate threat of professional exile through the loss of FDPPI accreditation.
It is a comprehensive system. It's totally designed to catch any drift toward bias before it can compromise the data.
And reflecting on the sheer scale of these enforcement mechanisms, it leaves us with a critical, broader implication to consider.
What's that?
Well, we are seeing the data auditing world adopt the exact same stringent, independently enforced term limits that have governed statutory financial auditors for decades.
Yeah, the perils are striking.
They are, and this implies we have quietly crossed a massive threshold in corporate governance. In today's hyper-connected world, a company's data compliance is no longer viewed as a secondary IT issue. It is now treated as being just as critical and just as foundational to its ultimate survival as its financial solvency.
Wow. If the rules required to protect the data are now identical to the rules required to protect the money, it tells you exactly how valuable that data has truly become. Something definitely worth thinking about. Thank you for bringing this fascinating topic to us, and thank you to the listener for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of independence. We will catch you next time.